Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming to Game Changers 2 for 2016. And thanks for battling the rain and the Brisbane gridlock, which I think the Lord Mayor's going to speak to tomorrow in the budget with some big solutions. But it is difficult at this hour to get to this place, so we thank you for coming. To begin with, I'd like to... my name's Peter Little. I'm a Deputy Vice-Chancellor at QUT. And also a member of the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame Governing Committee. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting here tonight and pay our respects to the elders who came before them. The location of the State Library on Kurilpa Point was historically a significant meeting, gathering and sharing place for Aboriginal people, and we proudly continue that tradition here today. I also acknowledge our speaker tonight, Bruce Wolfe, Managing Director of Conrad Gargett, a great Queenslander, a great Queensland business and a long-standing Queensland business. Ray Weeks, Chairman of the CEO Institute, who will be conducting the interview. Members of the Library Board of Queensland, the Queensland Library Foundation, QUT Business School, and the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame Governing Committee. We also acknowledge our generous donors and partners, Crow Horwath, Channel 7, Logan City Council, Morgans, NAB and RACQ. This event tonight is designed to bring innovative leaders from business, technology and the creative industries to share their insights with us. It's a rare platform that we have to enable Queensland's leading game changers to share their pathways to success and some of their battles and triumphs along the way. Throughout this series, we're trying to truly understand what it is to be a game changer. Game Changers is an initiative of the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame. For those of you who don't know, the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame was established in 2008-2009 by the State Library, the Queensland Library Foundation and the QUT Business School. The Hall of Fame was established to capture the stories of our great Queensland businesses and leaders of business, going right back to the beginning of the state and even in some cases prior to the commencement of Queensland as a state in 1859. We want to capture their stories, create a business memory so that today's generation and future generations will be able to understand what it took to build the state that we have today and the emerging state. The Game Changer series is made up of 4 conversations annually with individuals who are on the cutting edge of their industries. And I'm sure tonight, like previously, their stories will not only fill you with inspiration and knowledge to incorporate into your professional endeavours, but will also help you to make a contribution to Queensland's economic and commercial development. We'd also like to invite you to the signature event of the Hall of Fame, and that is the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame induction dinner, which will be on the 28th of July at the Brisbane Convention and Exhibition Centre. We have inducted 56 great Queensland leaders, and we will induct another 6 on the 28th of July. It's a not to miss event, and we just have a short video about the event to give you a taste of what will happen on the 28th.
Queensland has been home to some of our nation's proudest achievements. Since 2009, the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame has honoured our state's rich history of entrepreneurship. Join me on Thursday, July 28th as we celebrate the many contributions made by a new cohort of Queensland's leaders of business. Together with your help, we can recognise the growth, innovation and success of our great state.
Tickets are on sale, and if you visit the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame website or the State Library website, you'll find access to the ticketing system. But tonight we're here to hear from Bruce Wolfe, Managing Director of Conrad Gargett. We're indeed pleased to have him. And also we say welcome to those who are watching through the live streaming. We encourage our live stream viewers to tweet your questions as we're going using the hashtag QBLHOF. Similarly, if you're in the audience and you wish to tweet or text your questions, please feel free to use the QBLHOF hashtag. If you want to hold your questions till the end, there will be plenty of time to address your questions to Bruce at the end. But now I'd like to introduce Ray Weeks, our regular chairman and interviewer, to introduce Bruce and conduct tonight's interview. Thanks, Ray.
Well, good evening and welcome to the second ever Game Changer series of events for 2016. Now, just to follow up what Peter said, this Game Changer series is where you get this great opportunity, this very special opportunity to hear from our successful entrepreneurs and business leaders, our independent thinkers, the brave mavericks, the ones who set the big goals, the ones who challenge the status quo. Now, in this place, and as Peter said, it's a very rare experience. In this place, they share their insights, their stories, their learnings along the way. Bruce Wolfe, as you know, Bruce Wolfe is Managing Director of Conrad Gargett, one of Australia's leading design practices. Bruce has worked on some of Australia's largest and most innovative building projects, including the $1.5 billion Lady Cilento Children's Hospital that opened in 2014. Now, in our conversation tonight, you'll hear from Bruce on what drives him, what are his principal design concerns, including a connection to community and inviting and experiential architecture and an integration between art and place. He has a commitment to innovation in design, a key example of which we'll speak about tonight is the St Stephen's Hospital in Hervey Bay, Australia's first fully integrated digital hospital. Driving forces for Bruce Wolfe are design for people and design for longevity. The company that Bruce leads, Conrad Gargett, is one of Australia's major architectural practices and has 126 years of achievement in design. It kicked off in 1890 by designing the city's fire station and Brisbane's first high-rise in 1928. Now, how many stories was that? 10. It was 10? About that, anyway. 10 stories. First high-rise. So Conrad Gargett's projects do cover health, education, defence, the design of a 100-hectare sustainable community in Tripoli, in Libya, conservation work on Canberra's Parliament House, and a UN project in Ethiopia. And these are all globally recognised projects. So please welcome our game changer tonight, Bruce Wolfe. Bruce.
Thank you very much.
Good to be with you. Bruce, you've had quite a life, and I just want to go through maybe some of the highlights of your personal journey. You've been a jackaroo, you've been a teacher, you've been a designer. Just take us through some of the highlights of your personal journey.
Jackaroo, that was a fair while ago. But when I finished architecture, I'd never actually spent any time in the outback. We'd lived in different cities like Townsville or Campton, but I really wanted to experience what was advertised as being Australia. So I went up to the Gulf country and got a job as a jackaroo, and I guess good training as an architect, riding a horse and rounding up the sheep, I don't know. But yeah, after that I did come back to Brisbane, and I got a job at Queensland University teaching in architecture. And that led to a job with the, as a designer actually for the Brisbane Festival, the first Brisbane Festival when it separated from Warana, and then joined a theatre company, not as an actor, unfortunately, but as an administrator and designer, again, design of the sets and so on. And yeah, much later, I suppose, it seemed much later anyway, that I went back to architecture and quite enjoyed it. But it was a brave thing to go back to architecture when I graduated and didn't really obviously have the passion to be an architect then, and to go back and say, okay, I'm beginning at square one, how's it going to go?
Mm-hmm. Hey, talking about great design, have you seen Bruce's socks? Well, why did you have to show me up to? Did you have a great ambition in those early days? Did you set personal goals along the way?
Yeah, there were a couple of things there. Like the ambition, the first real ambition was to make enough money so that was actually more than my rent was, which was hard in theatre, as anybody knows. It's a really difficult way to earn a crust. So ambitions early on weren't that great. I did want to, I guess, stay in the creative field, and architecture always sounds as though it's a creative pursuit, but there's so much of architecture that's really just hard business, and there's a portion that is creative. And it was my ambition, I guess, to get into that, to make that the kernel of what I did in architecture. And when I started at Conrad Gargett, it wasn't immediately apparent that that's where I could fit in. You fit in at the bottom end of a very large organisation, and you've got to show your wares and show that you're capable, and then move up.
So what was your first role there, Conrad Gargett?
I was working on a building that's now been demolished at PA Hospital. And health, I guess, is one of the big bodies of work that I became involved in.
So what do you know about yourself now that you didn't know about yourself then?
I think I was more devil-may-care in those times, and I think now I guess what I didn't know, that I'd be as resilient as I am. I thought if things got tough, I'd probably go and try something easier. But it's not always been easy in this role, and I think anyone that sets their sights on management of people is in for an experience, that's for sure. So I've learned a lot about myself in the way I deal with people as well.
So if I had to ask members of your team, tell me about Bruce Wolfe. What would they say?
Any of them here? I certainly didn't advertise the fact. No, look, they'd say that I'm energetic. They'd say that I actually listen, because our resource at Conrad Gargett is our people. I mean, that's what we offer to the outside world, is the talent of the people that work with us. So if I'm not in tune with what they have to offer, then I'm not a very good leader.
I'll come back to your values later, but let's just talk about Conrad Gargett for a minute. You've had 18 years now with the organisation. This is an incredibly, intensely competitive market that you're dealing with, yet you've grown this business quite dramatically. So how did you go about it? Just explain some of the reasons for your growth story.
I guess it's been 18 years as CEO. Prior to that, I was an architect with the practice, moving up to lofty heights of being a junior associate, and then I was appointed managing director from that junior associate position, and that was, I guess, the challenge. There were a lot of directors in a shrinking company. We'd gone through the 80s, the boom times, and then late 80s, the recession, and very difficult time for the practice, losing a lot of major projects where the decisions were being made not in Brisbane anymore, but with the recession, the centres of decision making moved back to Melbourne and Sydney, and so Brisbane became more of an outpost after that, and so a lot of work disappeared. So we were starting from a very low base when I became managing director, and I also had to, I guess, deal with the prospect of there being so many directors there that had to be bought out. So it was a difficult time.
And you're recognised for this priority you place on sustainability and your ability to build communities, not just buildings. So just take us through some of how you see the significance, the importance of this style of architecture.
Yeah. Sorry, I'll answer the last part of the other question too, on the growth. And I guess coming from that point, it was really a matter of not wanting to grow so much as wanting to get some good projects in through the door. And so in getting those projects in, we suddenly found that the more you did good projects, the more projects came in, and gradually we've built up to quite a large practice. But part of that was that philosophy of sustainability, and it's not only about sustainability in architecture or sustainability where we're talking about energy efficiency and all those sorts of things. A sustainable community is one that treats the environment that they're in as a quality that sustains them. So it's the quality of space, the quality of environment that they're getting, not just the fact that they're doing something good for the planet. It's actually sustainable in a way that people can work and live within a 30-minute journey, for example, and not the gridlock that you heard about tonight. Sustainability is far more than just making sure you get the answers of environmental degradation right.
And some of the changes, the major changes in architecture in Queensland, just take us through maybe how you've seen. Design seems to be a much more important element.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've discovered is the climate. I mean, rediscovered the climate. For a long time, Queensland didn't understand how good we have it here, and the houses were the boxes that you'll know from those between the wars years. And I think that understanding that the climate is so benevolent that the inside and the outside can be quite blurred on a domestic scale. And even in the larger buildings, the public buildings, like this library, for example, there's so much space that's actually unair-conditioned space, the public space, that's so inviting to just come in, even on a cold night like this evening.
Yeah, that's right. So how do you stay ahead of the game? This is an industry that's... and I want to come back to some of the political sensitivities that you've dealt with projects, but the industry is ever changing. How do you stay ahead of the game?
I'd like to start again with the people that we engage in the practice, because that really is the dynamic of the office. If you've got an office studio environment where people are quite comfortable in espousing new ideas, challenging each other without fear of some sort of negative response, you've really got a way of inquiry. And so it's not just a matter of going to conferences where there is that sort of more collegiate environment. It's engaging in the dialogue about architecture that's worldwide, and then being able to recreate that within your own practice so that it becomes the morning tea chatter. Sure, it's about the football sometimes, but it's also about design and challenging new ideas. So if something comes up in a program, in a magazine, online, there's a propensity to discuss it internally and challenge it.
And I mentioned some of the major projects you've been involved with, including this 100-hectare sustainable community in Tripoli, Libya, the Sunshine Coast University Hospital, this UN project to refurbish African Hall, this range of projects and a number of geographies, just to name a few. What's the type of project you most enjoy working on, and why? Why is that?
I think you ask a lot of architects that it's the challenge of the unknown, where there isn't an immediate answer, where the answer isn't apparent. In fact, there may not even be an apparent solution. And so going into a project like Libya, where you've got to understand the culture, understand the limitations of the infrastructure, deal with a whole lot of unknowns, and yet come out with a design solution that wins a competition, it's that sort of challenge that really keeps you on edge, and that's the reward. I mean, to win those sorts of projects is fantastic. Africa Hall in Ethiopia, Africa Hall was a building built during a time when there was a lot of enthusiasm for Africa having a national government, so they built this wonderful building. And it's since fallen into disrepair. They're now going to make it into a convention centre. And to actually win a job with the United Nations from Brisbane was a great thing to do. Now, I'm not going to take any credit for that at all. That was other people in our practice.
Let me ask about another project, recent project of yours, which is inspirational. And I've read something about it. I want to get to see this project. It looks outstanding. This is the piano mill, and it's this unique architectural feature. It's this outrageous musical instrument with 14 pianos. It's this homage to the musical history of outback Australia. I mean, tell us about this project, what inspired you to do it, and take us to also, you were a trumpet, you were a bass player yourself. You weren't, as you said, not one of the great jazz musicians of our time, but you played a lot of instruments. It's clearly a passion of yours. Tell us about this project and your passion for music.
Certainly got a passion for music. I'm a married musician, but but the piano mill came about with that idea, I guess, that background idea that Australia had an enormous number of pianos, more pianos in Australia per head of population than any other country in the world in the 19th century, which is pretty unusual, until you start to think about why that might be the case. And the way it might be the case is to have a homestead in outback Queensland, for example, was like the centre of community. The lounge room in that homestead became the reproduction of the hall in the town in England where you've come from. So it was their connection back to culture in that sort of inverted commas way. So every homestead had to have a piano because that was that connection. Similarly, in the mining towns, plethora of pubs in the mining towns, but to call yourself a pub, you had to have a piano. So these pianos were going out on the drays to the outback that had just brought the wool back into the cities. And this idea fascinated me. And I guess it would have just been an idea that fascinated me had I not met this composer, Eric Griswold, an American chap, now lives in Australia, but he composes for prepared piano, meaning that he actually changes the sound of these pianos. So my idea was that there were all these pianos in outback Australia pre-preparing themselves, so they didn't even have to touch them through age and degradation had changed. So this to me then became an architectural project to make a building that was just like a musical instrument. So there's 16 pianos and there's 2 pianos per wall, per floor. So it's a copper-clad tower with vents on the outside that open like the vents on an organ maybe. And there are a few other things that work and tinkle inside. So it's a giant instrument that this composer composed a piece for.
Yeah, it's magnificent. And tell me, there's one question that's come through, I might just ask you this too. How do we balance sustainability and human equity with 7 billion people globally?
I mean, human equity across the planet and sustainability is nearly an impossible equation. And we're now in a situation where even in a wealthy country like Australia, we can't do a forecast of being able to afford the healthcare that we're talking about. We can't afford to build the buildings that are going to provide that. I'm not sure that there's a solution on a global scale for everybody to be equal with the sort of consumption that we have in the West. If someone does have that solution, I'd love to hear it. But we've worked in China, doing hospital in China right now actually. Worked in Tripoli. And if you look at the difference in the consumption of raw materials in those countries compared to us, it's absolutely staggering. But if we look at the community that we designed for in Tripoli, it was based on recycling really, and based on having jobs in the same place that people lived, based on education being close by. And had it not been for the Civil War, I guess most of it would have been constructed, but some of it was built, some of it was destroyed during that war as well.
Let's just come to the digital economy and how has it significantly affected architecture? What's the digital transformation that you're dealing with? You can talk about St Stephen's Hospital too.
I can talk about that, yeah. On a number of levels, technology has really radicalised the place in which we work. When I first joined Conrad Gargett, there were still about 100 people and we'd produce this much work per day because it was on tracing paper and all those sorts of things. And now with the three-dimensional models that we're dealing with, we create those quite quickly. We're dealing with ideas that can change very rapidly because of that technology, and we can integrate not only the services and all those other sorts of things that make up a building, but we can then go on to give that model to the manager of the building after it's completed, so that he can manage his whole maintenance program through that model. But you mentioned St Stephen's Hospital. It was the first fully digital hospital in Australia, and what that means is it's a paperless environment, so that there's no doctor writing a script as such, that all of that information is digitally held, goes down to a dispensing unit that dispenses the medications without involvement of people putting things in. What they've noted in all of this is that their error rate in drug administration has gone down by 50%, and that's a remarkable achievement. There's also something about I don't know how many people go in hospitals, and there are a lot of staff racing around looking for things that they can't find. And every serious bit of equipment in this hospital is tagged and is located. So there's a network of systems within the hospital that tracks everything that they have. So there's none of that hunting for things. So things are very immediate in terms of...
Look, I've got to ask you one question. What is the one building you wish you'd constructed? What is the one building that exists today that you wish you'd been responsible for?
Well, Louis Kahn's got a lovely museum in the US. There are so many. I wish I had the talent to design. So,
The Guggenheim?
well, which one? The Frank Lloyd Wright one would have been more my taking than Bilbao.
Yeah.
Look, technology has come into the fore in the way we think about shape making with buildings, and up until that time, the idea of making something so free form would have been just out of the question. The maths would have been too difficult, the drawings would have been too difficult. But the medium that we work in at the moment is so flexible that you can do whatever you like, and it can be built.
So in the company's 125-year history, are there certain core values, certain fundamental beliefs that you've held throughout that time?
I think that's quite true, and they've in a way been passed on. I think integrity is probably one. I know that seems a little old-fashioned to even mention, but the idea that you do try to deliver value on everything that you do, and not be sort of persuaded by fad or fashion, but really look at the intrinsic values of things and listen to what the client is talking about. I mean, so many people, recent graduates, they kind of believe that it's their building. It's not the architect's building. The building either belongs to the community or belongs to the client, but it's not yours. And your job is to facilitate the very best answer that you can possibly get from the environment that's in, that's context, the budget that's been provided, and the functionality that you're trying to drive. And at the same time, this overarching thing about community is so important, that you're actually putting this building into a community. It's not like you're doing a painting or work of art that goes on the wall and someone can put it away. These buildings that you make are there for a long time. They occupy space, they occupy people's environment. They can affect the traffic of people moving through the city. They can affect the wind as it runs through between buildings. They have such an enormous effect on the way people live, where their shops are. It's so important to get that right.
If you look at that, again, that long history of the company, how does that change? You must feel the pressure of that 125-year history in terms of what's the approach you take to business? How does that affect
I didn't actually feel that pressure until about 2 years into the job, and we had an exhibition, 12 Decades of Design at QUT Art Museum. And I was standing there, and it was the partner of the wife of one of the previous directors came up to me and said, "Oh, Bruce, you must feel such an enormous weight on your shoulders. This practice has been around for 115 years and you're taking it on, you can't let it fail." Oh, gee. But that was the first time it was really drummed home to me. But, I had no intention of letting it fail, and my aim is to hand it on in much better condition than I received it in. And I think that's certainly the case at the moment.
But anything else in how it changes your approach to the business? Just that history that you're dealing with, or is not?
Look, I think it's very important. One of the things that we sell when we're offering our services is this wealth of experience that has come down through so many generations, I guess. And what we're able to offer is this collective memory that I guess is dispensed by architects in the practice. But the important thing in that is that you've got to balance that with being innovative. If the practice had only done that, it would have died several times. You've always got to be looking beyond tomorrow and looking for solutions in the future. You cannot possibly rely on just being good at what you did yesterday.
And there are these competing tensions. I mean, let's talk about your appetite for risk. You're also known as a strong financial manager. You've got certain conservatism comes into play there. You've got this creative spirit. You've got this innovation. You've got these competing tensions. So just explain how you handle that.
Maybe I could do that with a couple of examples. See, the Children's Hospital, the Lady Cilento Children's Hospital, that was a competition where we had to win the project from other competing architects. So how do you play your hand for this enormous project that's come into the office or that's come onto the scene and you want in your practice, and how many risks you're willing to take? So our approach to that hospital was to go to this interview and talk about a new way of looking at healthcare, particularly for children. This was to be an open building, a building where you could see through into the inside, where kids could see out, where you didn't have that strong definition of kids being inside locked up, sick kids, and well kids being on the outside. And the selling point of being a permeable building where I guess the children could still feel as though a part of community was really important to us. And it was aided by the fact that it's next to two schools. So we designed that building, and we talked about this in the interview as children being able to move through the hospital to normalise the environment in there. The other thing with those big openings that look in, of course, it gives the opportunity to see out, so the intuitive navigation within the building is much easier to accomplish. And I guess I've always taken risks in presenting new ideas, but once you've got the idea in your hand and have to deliver it, then you're quite conservative. You do all the analysis, you rigorously research any precedents for that. Like we've got naturally ventilated spaces within a hospital. This is kind of radical thinking, but right through the two atria there, they're environments that natural ventilation, plenty of sunlight comes in. So how do you handle all of that in a clinical environment?
Second example, you said there were two.
Much earlier there was a design competition out at University of Queensland for Therapies in Anatomy building, and it was a building that didn't have a large footprint, so I maximised in the design competition, maximised the southern elevation by sort of cutting a slot out of the bottom and then putting a inverted wing, if you like, over that opening and bouncing the light off the two wings of the building up to the underside of the foil and down into the space between the two wings. So I'd never actually seen it work and so it was a bit of how is anybody that is assessing our submission going to think about it? So it was a risk for the company too, I guess, because I was just a youngster at that time, and fortunately they decided it was a good idea, and the building's still there. So.
Good. Is there a building you wish you hadn't built?
Yep. One of them's been demolished, which is okay. Look, I think in the 80s there are a lot of things built that you probably wouldn't think are the greatest answers in the world. And one thing now, though, the rigour of design now is so much that you don't, in our practice anyway, things that get up have usually gone through a fair sort of sieve to get where they are.
Yeah, of course. Nothing else you want to say about that? You've been described, this is by Lydia person. She was quoted in BMAG describing you as an incredible philanthropist. Now, I've just got to cover this for a moment. I know you're probably going to push back on me for doing this, but 20 years ago, as a father of two small children, you'd get out of bed at 4:30 a.m. and before work you'd deliver coffee and sandwiches to the homeless. And following the tsunami, you went to Aceh and also to Sri Lanka to volunteer your time in discussions with architects over there. And more recently, you and Jocelyn established a foundation to support Indigenous education programs, including Yalari, a program which helps education to Indigenous children in rural and remote communities. Why is this important to you?
That sounds much grander, right? Than it actually is. But, a lot of people work really hard and, they don't have good luck. We've had good luck. Even, when we didn't have a lot of money, we still had good luck. And, you would see people on the streets in the morning, and I saw that they were getting coffee from this, little group that gave out coffee, and it was the Ecumenical Coffee Brigade. And it really hit me that there was something that was quite simple to do, that didn't take much effort, and it was early morning, but I'm an early morning person, so it was something that I did for a while, but it became quite established. It wasn't established that strongly when I first joined it, and now you see them everywhere. Those little coffee brigades go out in the morning and give breakfast, and I guess that's just my opinion, that it's as much luck as it is hard work, and so with the Indigenous community, I mean, there is so much hard work that is to do there, and I'm not sure that any particular thing that's engaged in is the answer to ameliorating that gulf of advantage and disadvantage.
Disparity. Yeah.
But we'd do if we could, yeah.
Good. I asked you before about how your team members would describe you, but how do you describe your leadership style? How do you see yourself as a leader? And what are the attributes you would regard as being important for leadership?
Look, I think one of the main things is that you do actually get around to making the decisions, because so many people, it's so much easier not to make a decision in some ways. They're always competing forces in decision making. So you've got to make a decision based on what you think is right, like you gather as much information as you can, but you must make the decision. You can't just be wishy-washy. And, I've made mistakes, and so long as the number of good decisions outweighs the number of poor ones by a reasonable margin, you're okay. But leadership too, I think, is understanding who you're leading, and I make a bit of an effort to understand the capability of the people that are working for us. Like, everyone has their strengths and weaknesses, and just understanding that, and therefore being able to connect with those people and being willing to listen to them, to understand what they're bringing to the table, immediately puts you in a better position than if you're just forcing things down all the time. You've got to let things come up and treat that with respect.
And that takes a certain level of self-awareness too, of course.
I think it does, but I'm pretty aware that I'm not the strongest in quite a few fields, and I need other expertise to make us work as a large practice.
So, what drove you through the firm's greatest challenge during your time at the helm? And just explain what that was.
I think it was the day I took over as managing director and really found out, I guess, the financial situation. I was incredibly naive, and to discover that it was probably sensible business, that the overdraft equalled the incoming work. But it made me feel pretty fragile, because that income was the only income that we had. And to overcome that was really about addressing the amount of work that we could get back in through the office. So going out and winning projects, whatever they were, and trying to get some really strong projects into the office. But the challenge then was, we were a disbalanced organisation. We had shrunk from being quite large to being reasonably small. So the balance between directors and actual production people was wrong. And so being able to effectively deliver those projects for the cost, for the competitive fee, was the challenge. And I guess the way we did that was all working really hard. And, you know, we had probably 20 people that worked exceedingly hard for a year to make sure that we had, you know, put that foundation in place. And then you turn around one day and you realise, oh gee, it's all okay. And pretty reassuring.
So, Bruce, you're here tonight as a game changer. Do you see yourself as a game changer?
I tried to analyse that when that's when I mean, I've been to the game changer thing before. I'd never really considered, but people have told me that that I have changed that game. And I guess part of it is the risks that you've taken, and even taking on the role that I did with Conrad Gargett. People said that was an enormous risk, and you know, you've changed that whole organisation. But in a way, I didn't see the risk. I was just looking at what I was doing, and you know, that's what I wanted to get on and do. And with the Children's Hospital, people have said, well, that's a radical change for the way health buildings could be, and I'm really pleased with the outcomes. I know it's been in the press for a lot of reasons that nothing to do with the architecture, but even then their particular personal positions that have come up that have driven commentary on it. But as a building, as an operating hospital, it's received, you know, all the awards in both health and architecture. Like the Academy of Design and Health has given it its top gong for a number of different areas. So, but it wouldn't have been that building unless you were willing to change the game of children's health.
Some people see, and they've said it to you, I think, and others, they see this rebellious streak in you. They see this irreverence. And that, do you agree with that?
I only let it come out of my socks now. No, look.
In the past,
you would have said that. The friends that knew me back in, I guess, the 70s can't really equate that person with the person that's in this position of responsibility. And to be honest, I can't either. It's been a big change in priorities. I mean, my priorities then were about, I guess, sucking the life out of my life and getting as much out of it as I could. But it was in a different sort of way. And now I really enjoy what I do, and I get enormous satisfaction out of doing what I'm doing. And yet it's, I guess, in a suit and tie that perhaps would have looked a little strange on me in the 1970s.
On all of us.
That's right.
So looking back in your personal journey then as a business leader, just what has, take us through maybe some of the biggest learnings along the way you want to share with us here today, just as really important learnings?
Yeah, staying focused is really hard sometimes when, you know, the world is changing around you and you're trying to deliver something in a cloud of noise. And I think being able to persist with something until you can complete it, rather than dissipate your energies, is probably the biggest thing I've learnt. I mentioned earlier the resource of an architectural practice is the people that work there. Being able to get the best out of those people and select the right people for a start is just so critical. And you know, as soon as everyone's not swimming in the same direction, you've got a problem. If you've got even 2 or 3 people out of 100 that I guess aren't contributing and they're still there, then the other 97 people are saying, well, you know, how come I'm having to work so hard on making up for them? We have a balance of that at Conrad Gargett, in that not everyone's a star architect, like a star designer. Not everyone understands construction. Not everybody deals with people in the way that others do. But trying to get the whole of the practice to understand that not everyone has to be the same in order to contribute to a successful practice. I think that's been a bit of a learning as well.
Good. Questions? I just might lift the lights just a little bit just so I can see you. Any question? Right here? What a surprise.
Bruce, thanks for coming.
Now we're getting a microphone to you now. Thanks.
Thanks for coming and sharing your time and your skills and attributes with us. It's been very enlightening. Step one question, you talked about innovation. You've done some fairly large projects with innovation, so you've been able to look for technology and understand how that would affect the buildings that you're designing. How do we get that same theory and philosophy in residential architecture? We're still building homes in the way that we used to build them and not looking at the future data requirements.
Yeah, there's two things in that. We're still building them the way we did, and that's pretty unusual. Like the car industry from last century or early last century, it's so totally different now. The building industry, pretty much the same. Sticks of timber, and that's in houses. I can't understand why industrialised building hasn't moved along. If there were industrialised building, I'm sure that the data requirements would be factored into those just like they are into modern cars, and that these buildings would be pre-wired in what you're suggesting is a environment where there's so much retrofitting of data. And I really can't understand why there isn't that why there isn't a knowledge of data when you're designing a home. There are quite elaborate systems, of course, that can end up costing a huge amount of money. That the lights dim when you come into a room. You say it's dinner time, and suddenly all the lights change, and you order your next meal on the fridge, and all those sorts of things. But those are the things that aren't fundamental to our existence. But having data connection in your bedroom, in the study, in the living room where the TV is, and being able to make your smart TV smart, all those things you'd think would be fundamental. I'm not sure. I mean, I've just designed a home for some friends, and they went through all sorts of levels of ideas of data and connectivity in their home. They came back to something around about the middle, that their fridge doesn't talk to them in the morning, but other things do change when they come into a room.
Another question? Yep. Thanks.
Bruce, thanks very much. You talked about the challenges, the learnings, the insights. I'm keen to hear about what was the most fun, the project, the experience, the meeting. What was the bit you had the most fun along the way?
This is going to sound a little odd, but it was actually a defence project when we moved a whole lot of disparate organisations who had marvellous outlook over Sydney Harbour, and we took them and relocated them to Townsville at Ross Island, which was like a mosquito-infested area. But the fun part was actually the team that did it. There was a great director from Defence that was leading the project. We were saving the Australian government a mozza of money because all of these people did more or less the same thing, duplicating their services around Sydney Harbour. And, they were moving into a purpose-built facility at Ross Island, and everything came together in a really harmonious way. I mean, they worked so much better together. But the team that we work with, the engineers, the design managers, we just had a huge amount of fun. And, we had songs that we'd sing at meetings. I mean, it was just, it was a kind of weird environment because you'd expect defence projects the most boring thing, but it wasn't at all. It was exciting. But if you're asking for the most exciting building, that wasn't Ross Island.
So there's one question that's come through from the, how's the game of balance and progression changed in leadership, and how have you adapted?
Balance and
progression.
So balance meaning that you're conservative and...
Well, balance in life, balance between the work you do, the family life you have, and progression.
Yeah.
We've got to apply a bit of interpretation to this question.
Yeah. Well, balance in life can be anything. I mean, if you really enjoy what you're doing, there's a whole lot of related activities to work that can be enjoyable, and so your work-life balance. Like, for example, that piano mill, it didn't happen without effort and considerable work, and of course it can't happen during your work as being a managing director, and it can't happen while you're on Business South Bank board. It happens independently to that. So your life expands, like what you do really expands. And I still considered that I had a balanced life, even though someone looking from the outside might have said, oh, you're always working. And last New Year's Eve, someone recommended that my resolution was that I should concentrate on being a human being instead of a human doing. So, it took a while to adjust to that comment. But what was the other bit? In progression?
Progression, yeah.
Well, I mean, I do want to evolve. I don't particularly want to be a revolutionary, but I do want to change the way I am. I want to increase my capacity for doing things. I want to increase the number of things that I know how to do. So in that way, there's a sort of progression.
So what excites you about the future? What for you personally?
Well, there's a whole lot of things I want to do. The piano mill is up at a place called Harrigan's Lane, which is a property in the bush where we support emerging artists and musical events such as that. I want to be far more involved in those things. So I find that really exciting. It's struggling because it's a struggle for your brain to come up with new things all the time. But the idea of being able to create something that's never been done before is a fair bit of an energiser for me. And so I'll enjoy that. I'll also enjoy continuing on with Conrad Gargett for a number of years, and I'm not going to say how many. But it's an exciting environment to be in. It's an environment that changes all the time. And we're working in a number of places around the world now, and I'm finding that pretty invigorating as well.
Thanks, Bruce. Yep, thank you.
Oh, hi, Bruce. Nice to hear you talk. I'm a retired structural engineer. I spent my career providing sympathetic, buildable and reasonably economic structures inside architects' design concepts. I'm not going to ask you your opinion of consulting engineers. I wouldn't dare. But I want to get into the area of the amount of apartment construction that's going on in Brisbane at the moment. I think it's challenging a lot of our ways that we want to live and the apartments that are going on. If you drive into the Brisbane city from almost any direction, you see two particular buildings sticking up above all the rest. One of them, they're both apartment buildings. One of them is the top end of Adelaide Street near Boundary Street. And the other one's in Herschel Street.
So what's your question?
The question is that these apartment buildings are built on plot ratios of around 27 or 28, where 10 or 11 is high. And I'm just wondering what you think about the boom in apartment construction that's going on is sympathetic to what we want in Brisbane for the future. Do we want another Hong Kong here? I've actually talked to the Brisbane City Council about...
Bruce, no, we've got the question. Bruce?
Yeah. Look, I think Brisbane does have to densify. There are a lot of reasons for that, not least of all the cost of infrastructure. I mean, the less time we spend travelling out to, the outer suburbs, whichever direction, the less time you spend on roads, the less money there is needed to make those roads. All sorts of infrastructure costs less if you can provide some degree of density. I can't really say that there's an economic justification for the two Meriton towers. There probably isn't. A gentleman from Melbourne had a lot of money and he wanted to build up to the ceiling that's provided by the airport. So the airport governs the height of buildings in the CBD. And the third building that's of that height is the new 1 William Street, which is state government offices. I think there'll be a time when there'll be a lot more of that height building in the CBD. What we've got to take cognizance of is the spaces around those buildings. So you can't just put apartment buildings next to apartment buildings in the way that office buildings can be 10 metres apart. Looking into another office building at 10 metres apart isn't a real disaster. It's done everywhere and nobody worries about the privacy levels. Putting apartment buildings where the living room looks straight into a living room, a bathroom looks across at a bathroom, bedroom at a bedroom, I think we've got to grow up in that area. I don't think there's quite enough sophistication in the way we're procuring those buildings. I don't think we've had enough experience in that density. And if you look at coming into the city from the valley, for example, there are a lot of buildings that you wonder who's going to be living in them, because the resultant urban environment isn't that flash. So how do we combine density with good living conditions? Well, you could take Paris for an example. It doesn't have super high buildings. The density is pretty high in the 20 arrondissements in the centre. There are other ways of doing it. If you want to have a few buildings with better views, there's no problem with going taller either. But what you've got to understand when you do those developments is that there's a privacy issue and there's an environmental issue on the ground plane. And I think the instruments are all a bit blunt at the moment that control that.
Thanks for that. Question, right?
G'day, Blake Barrett from Turner and Townsend Think, and I volunteer with Defence in Business. Firstly, I did ask the tweet question about the sustainability and global equity, and I appreciate your answer for that. My question now is a little bit more about the business leadership, understanding that your tenure with Conrad Gargett's been quite long. I read a book a few years ago about successful Australian CEOs and managing directors and the benefits of long tenures. My question is about what are some of the benefits and what are some of the challenges, and what may have been a challenging time in your tenure as the MD where people were looking to make a change, and how you might have convinced them otherwise.
There haven't been any of those yet. But when I took on the role, I really only wanted to be managing director for 10 years. I thought that was a reasonable length of time. But at the same time, I was appointing very, very young directors. And so you've got to wait till their maturity levels increase, which they've certainly done now. And I'm very comfortable and confident, and have been for several years, about the quality and maturity of the directorship that we have at Conrad Gargett. Whether or not I should stay for another 10 years, the answer is no. And when's the right time to go? I guess when you're not feeling as though you're contributing anymore. Or there are other priorities that you have to attend to. But as a corollary to that, there are a couple of practices that have joined us in recent times, Riddell's and Anchor Mortlock Woolley in Sydney, and another one is joining us next week. And they're practices that didn't have a very strong succession plan and saw Conrad Gargett as their succession plan. So there's no money that changes hands. One day they're working as Anchor Mortlock Woolley, the next day they're working as Conrad Gargett. And that's been a great benefit to us, a terrific benefit. If you look at the projects that we're doing, well, Africa Hall, for example, that project would not be in our practice had we not assumed Riddell's 4 years ago.
Thanks, Bruce. This question right here.
I left Brisbane many, many years ago and have had the fortune to be living in London. And I'm just a little bit concerned, I'm just back for a short period, that Australian cities are getting left behind, and I put a challenge to you that kind of smart cities before you leave is actually the really next big challenge.
Yeah, look, I think one of the things that we've forgotten is about public transport and infrastructure in a place like Brisbane. Perhaps we've always thought that it was going to be a town, not a city. And the changes that we will have to see about us being smart about commuting, smart about integrated technologies. Yeah, I think we're learning those lessons. But it's true. I think Brisbane is a little bit more relaxed about how it sees the future than it actually has to be. I think we can't be as relaxed as we were about change. We've got to govern the change, otherwise change just happens and you're left in that sort of land where you wake up one morning and it's not the outcome that you designed.
What advice would you give to entrepreneurs or to students embarking on a career in architecture? There's a few aspiring architects, designers, entrepreneurs in the audience today. What advice would you give?
Well, have a vision, I think. Like, be hungry for the outcomes. Nothing will just drop in your lap, I don't think. And if you are an architectural student about to graduate, look around and see what projects you would like to be working on. But when you go and apply in those organisations, don't expect that you're going to be at the top straight away, and be willing to contribute at whatever opportunity is given to you. And I think that's really important. A lot of young graduates come out and the focus on the teaching is the end game, the big picture and all those sorts of things. But we're not in the business of pictures, we're in the business of building. And we've got to understand building. And the best way of understanding building is by detailing, by going to visit building sites, seeing the actual construction happening. All those things give you a language in building that will support you in the design ambition that you have. You can't just have this design ambition without knowing how they go together.
Thanks, Bruce. There's a question right here.
Hi, thank you, Bruce. Kanchana Bishop from Tri-Helix Group. My question is sort of follows on from that one. It's about, is there companies like yours that are able to lead change in the building industry such that our buildings could be self-sustaining, self-generating power, more green, if you like, or whatever, but so that it, is there a push towards that? Because as we've discussed, like building hasn't changed.
Yeah.
People still build the same houses. We put some solar panels on.
Look, there are regulations in the Building Act that ensure a degree of energy efficiency in the building. But again, I mentioned something was a blunt instrument. These two are blunt instruments. What you've got to have is an aspiration. So the community will drive that aspiration. I mean, back in 1992, we did the environmental engineering building at Griffith University. We designed that as a labyrinth of a building with a hole in the middle, and cool air was drawn up through the middle of the building by a kind of butterfly roof on the top that provided a Venturi effect to bring that cool air in. And that was the air that supplied the air conditioning systems, and then the warm air was pumped out the site. Those are the sorts of things that have got to be considered in building. There was a slight premium for building in that way, but I guess the client, being the School of Environmental Engineering, was willing to push it. There are very energy efficient buildings around, very energy efficient buildings that relate well to the climate context. It's just that it's not yet universal. And how we make that universal is by everybody talking about it, not just architects, but everyone.
Can I ask you please to thank Bruce Wolfe?
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Very good.
Well, thank you, Ray and Bruce, for another excellent interview tonight, and some wonderful insights you shared, Bruce, into the mind of one of our Queensland game changers. It's clear that you're a modern, an innovative, design-thinking business leader, but if you don't mind me saying so, despite all that's been said about your socks tonight, there's one thing you're not, and that is you're not a hipster. Now, I don't know how many of you read Bernard Salt's article last Saturday week about hipsters not wearing socks, but I read the article, and I contacted my daughter in Melbourne and didn't tell her where I'd got it, but I said, do you know that hipsters don't wear socks? And she rang me later in the day. She said, Dad, you're amazing. She said, I just saw Karl Stefanovic on television and it was pointed out to him that he's not wearing socks. You're pretty cool. I didn't tell her that I'd read it in Bernard Salt's article. But Bruce, over the years that we've been running this Game Changer series, we say that true entrepreneurs and game changers see things that others don't. And this is often overlooked, So many of us spend our time looking down at, the daily tasks, looking in at ourselves and the organisation and looking backwards. But the true entrepreneurs and game changers are those who are looking out. And I thought, whether you see yourself in that way or not, your line, looking beyond tomorrow, is a keeper. That's a keeper for everybody here tonight. It's a wonderful line, and it's something that each of us should be practicing every day. I thought also you were very willing to give credit to all the people who work for you and not really take much credit yourself. And as we know, it's a maxim of great leaders that we'll achieve so much more if we don't mind who gets the credit. And I think, thirdly, I'd just like to say that if there is evidence of your game changing, I can see two things in particular tonight. One is the digital hospital, and it takes a certain sort of mind and a certain form of leadership to achieve that. But equally, and in I suppose a self-interested way, I think to be able to keep control of and build this business here, Conrad Gargett, as a true Queensland great business, and have others wanting to join you is game-changing in this era when so much of Queensland's business control is lost to other places. So thank you for sharing those insights. Ladies and gentlemen, would you thank Bruce once again? For those who'd like to revisit the conversation or share it with friends or colleagues, the webcast and transcript will be available on the SLQ website within a week. As I said earlier, we thank you all for coming, and if you'd like to come to the next Game Changers conversation on the 13th of October, so we're trying to do 2 in the first half of the year and 2 in the second half of the year, Ray will be interviewing or having a conversation with James Chin Moody, the co-founder and CEO of Sendle, a delivery business tapping into the big business delivery networks for small businesses, making parcel delivery simple, reliable and affordable. Sendle is also Australia's first technology B Corporation and the first that's 100% carbon neutral delivery service, making huge inroads, again led by another distinguished Queenslander. Can I also remind you about the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame induction dinner on the 28th of June. You'll see it on our website. July, I beg your pardon, 28th of July. And I've been asked to draw to your attention another opportunity called crowd giving. So on Tuesday, 5th of July, the Queensland Library Foundation will be holding here in Auditorium 1 a very special fundraising event, crowd giving. A $100 donation to the Queensland Library Foundation secures your place at crowd giving, an evening of fun and philanthropy based on the format of popular TV programs Shark Tank and Dragon's Den. You're invited to take part as 3 state library project managers pitch their social impact projects and field questions from a renowned Queensland philanthropist and audience members in an atmosphere of friendly competition. Have your say and help choose the project that receives the total prize pool of $10,000. Go to the SLQ website, look at under What's On, and make your booking. We'd love to see you there. So for now, thank you again for coming, and please join us for drinks and refreshments on the Queensland Terrace. Thanks very much.